We back. Some of the darkest scandal in NBA history: the death of Michael Jordan's rival. You talking about Lenny Bias? You know, from Maryland. He played at Maryland University. He was like a 6'8", 6'9", small forward. He's like kind of like Tatum. What Tatum is today, he was that in the 80s.
The darkest scandal in NBA history took away from us potentially one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Before his death, Len Bias was seen as a generational prospect, a future Hall of Famer, and a man who could have been Michael Jordan's biggest rival. He would have superseded Mike. Mike would have become great, but he had an edge on Mike. He was a better athlete. He was bigger and stronger. He was a slimmer LeBron, but with a jump shot. A huge statement, but these are the words of Olden Polynice, who not only played against both Jordan and Len Bias in college, but also was a number 8 pick and 15-year NBA vet. Olden was not the only one who thought this. Standing at 6'8" with a 44-inch vertical leap and the ability to bench at least 300 pounds, Len Bias scared opponents, and his dominance left players such as Jay Billis in awe.
He was Superman in a basketball uniform. I mean, I think it's like being on a golf course with Tiger Woods or something, or the time you played against Jordan. Like, there's a difference between being a great player and being transcendent, and he was in the transcendent category.
A transcendent talent, a slimmer LeBron, whose death was described by
I'll say more like Tatum.
Jesse Jackson as having the impact of Martin Luther King Jr. Today, we are going to see just how great Len Bias could have been and dive into what would become basketball's biggest scandal. So what's up, Mike here, and the athletic highlights of Len Bias are absurd. Watch here as he catches a lob and throws down a backwards dunk where his
head on a backboard.
The rim. This was not a once-in-a-lifetime event for Len. Bias showed us in college time and time again that his leaping ability was nothing short of ridiculous. It was game-changing. At 6'8", he had the athletic tools to be one of the all-time greats, as not only could he jump extremely high with, again, a 44-inch vertical, but also he played with both power and grace. He dunked on many people's faces, plowing through opponents on the way to the rim, while also in his senior season, he shot over 54% with 23.2 points per game as a 2-time ACC Player of the Year and 2-time All-American, which was in itself impressive enough to make us truly think what could have been. If we look at Len's final year in college compared to Jordan's final year in college,
Jordan averaged 20 points per game in college.
Len had the edge stats-wise, and on top of this, his jump shot.
Well, you know, some players are better than NBA than were in college, like Donovan Mitchell. Like, Donovan Mitchell been averaging 20 ever since he stepped foot in the NBA, but he couldn't even touch 20 in college. It just be like that sometimes.
Time was seen as both knockdown and impossible to defend against. In his senior season, Len would shoot around 86.5% from the free throw line, proving his potential as a shooter in the NBA, while as you can see in the highlights, Len would use his leaping abilities to rise over defenders and put up shots that no one could contest. And many would compare him as a prospect directly to Michael Jordan. John Sally, a 4-time NBA champion who played against Len in the ACC, has said,
Lenny is 6'9" and played like Michael. He was the beast. He was literally going to save the Celtics.
Now, the Celtics at the time did not exactly need saving yet. Len was the number 2 pick of the 1986 draft by the Boston Celtics. However, the 1986 Celtics won their final championship of the Larry Bird era in that year as they went 67-15.
But guys, before we continue, I am very excited to thank our friends at DraftKings.
Max, Mike Wizenba.
They were a juggernaut, and adding a generational prospect would have given them a second leg. The Bad Boy Pistons era very much may have never happened, as back in 1984, Boston had dealt Gerald Henderson to the Sonics for their 1986 first-round pick.
In terms of number 2.
Became the second pick in the entire draft, the pick that became Len Bias.
There he is, Len Bias.
I'll tell you, this is a great kid. He is the best athlete, in my opinion, in the whole draft.
Without Len in 1987, the Celtics would lose in the NBA Finals to the Lakers in 6 games. And then from 1988 to 1993, in those 6 seasons, they would win an average of 51 games with 1 trip to the Eastern Conference Finals and 2 second-round exits. AKA, they were just missing a star to put them over the top. It has been said that Larry Bird, whose career was cut short due to his back injury, could have found a second life himself, as Len Bias would have taken the minutes and offensive load that Bird provided for Boston from him if he were on the Celtics roster. In addition to all of this, throughout his time in the NBA, Michael Jordan Jordan had older veteran rivals in Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. However, among his peers, he had no equal. The closest Jordan had was Clyde Drexler, another shooting guard who was hyped up as potentially someone who could take Jordan's throne.
Drexler was older though, wasn't he?
Would claim he was better than Mike at the time, saying, "I was bigger, faster, stronger. I could do everything he could except shoot more." The media really made this a thing.
Clyde the Glide says we're the two best in the game.
Clyde was a threat. You know, I'm not saying he wasn't.
Took that
a threat,
personally.
But me being compared to him.
Took that personally.
Took offense to that.
Which meant in the 1992 NBA Finals, in Game 1, Jordan responded with the Shrug game, a game in which he connected on 6 three-pointers in the first half.
And he said he was at Magic Johnson's house before, because Magic Johnson was retired. He was doing commentary on ESPN or something like that. And he was just chilling with Magic Johnson the day before. Watch what I'm going to do, Magic. I'm going to hit 7 threes in the first quarter or in the first half.
Shrugged in disbelief at his own ability, leaving Clyde in shambles. Len Bias, meanwhile, had already proven in front of our eyes that he was ready to take on Mike as a true rival in that way. This would have only benefited everyone. If Michael Jordan had someone constantly pushing him, we already know him as the greatest of all time. Who knows how much better he could have been? After Jordan's first retirement, when he won his first 3 championships, he retired saying he had already done all he had set out to accomplish. Flem Bias was there, ready to steal his throne. Well, the NBA could have had their next generation of Bird vs. Magic. And in college, we had already seen the two go head-to-head in a game where Len Bias clearly rose to the occasion against Mike. Despite the fact that Maryland was very much overmatched, against the #1 ranked North Carolina Tar Heels, Len kept Maryland in the game with 24 points to Mike's 21, as Len proved that he not only was a physical marvel, but that also he had begun to develop a knockdown jumper, making 9 of his 11 field goals off of jump shots. Maryland was down 1 with about 2 minutes left before the Tar Heels broke this game open, but Len Bias was on the map and he wouldn't stop there. In his junior season, Len would lead Maryland to the Sweet 16 while also taking down future NBA Hall of Famer David Robinson in the process. Robinson would later say, he, Len Bias, was the only guy whose poster I had on my wall. Think of the
David
level of
Robinson
respect you must
in the
have
Navy
for a player who beat you to have his poster on your wall. And after a senior season that saw him finish as a first-team All-American and an eventual #2 pick for the Boston Celtics, Len Bias's opponents were convinced.
I believe he was headed toward Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame status, that he would have been, had he played in the NBA, a perennial all-star.
This is very sadly where the story turns, as Len Bias was such an incredible talent that his death would echo throughout the entire country.
I think it was the equivalent, Reese, for my generation of the Kennedy assassination. We all remember exactly where we were when we found out that Len Bias had died.
But what exactly happened? How did a healthy athlete in his prime, just 2 days after he was taken as the #2 pick in the 1986 draft, die? The short answer is a cocaine overdose. The long answer is much more complicated. While it has been said that this may have been the first time that Len Bias did cocaine, the dark truth that came out during the court cases that followed his death would reveal from testimony that the night began as one of celebration. After he was drafted #2 overall by the Boston Celtics, Bias would tell the media, "At Maryland we had a great team, but we were always the dark horse. I'm going to be the top dog now. I'm happy, elated, I can't wait. What else can I say? I'm in the NBA. I dreamed I'd get drafted to be able to play for Boston. That was a dream within a dream. Only this dream would become a nightmare, as Len Bias would go back to his dormitory suite with a Celtics jersey and a bag of Reebok shoes."
He went back to Maryland in the dorm? You're not even a student there no more, so why are you allowed to be back in the dorms?
His friends, it's time to
This dude's an NBA player. He's not a student no more.
celebrate. Unfortunately, this
At least not on campus.
would go too far, as the night would soon become dark. Again, some have said this was Len's first time using the drug. Some even at the time said he could have been given a drink.
I thought only students was allowed in dorms.
With cocaine, and because of his inexperience with cocaine, his body could not handle it. After Len's death, though, there was a court case in which Len's teammate Terry Long, who was present at his death, tells a very different story. This court case was looking to convict Brian Tribble of supplying the drugs. Tribble was one of 4 men doing the drugs, along with Len and Len's teammates Terry Long and David Gregg. In the court case that followed, Long would take the stand and say Bias had introduced him.
How do I do it all?
Mike's supposed to buy shift vitamins? I know you take those.
I choose Airborne.
To cocaine 3 years ago when he offered him the drug in a folded dollar bill. He and Bias used cocaine together 7 to 10 times after that, including once with Tribble and teammate David Craig at Tribble's apartment after a basketball game during the 1986 season.
He asked with a, hold up. The ones he asked Bias with a quote, he said don't ask no questions.
apartment after a basketball game during the 1986 season. David Craig, another teammate of Len and another person present on the night of his death, testified in court that he had used cocaine 4 or 5 times with Bias, and when asked how many times Bias supplied him with the drug, Greg said about 3 times. On the night of Len's death,
That scared me.
Applied him with the drug. Greg said about
They got masks of us?
On the night of Len's death, Terry said Bias awakened him at about 2 or 2:30 a.m. by knocking on his bedroom door. Bias said, "Wake the blank up. We're gonna celebrate." The 4 men, Len, Terry, Greg, and Tribble, continued to pass the mirror and snort cocaine until sometime around 6 a.m. This is
2:30, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Wake the blank up. We're gonna celebrate. The 4 men, Len, Terry, Greg, and Tribble, continued to pass the mirror and snort cocaine until sometime around 6 a.m. This is when Long said Bias rested on Long's bed for about 5 minutes. Bias tried to go up and go to the bathroom, but could not because he was all wobbly. Then Bias had a seizure, and it was during this seizure that Len Bias's life would be taken from him, as he would pass away at the hospital after doctors were unable to save him. Whether or not we believe Terry Long is up to the individual here. This is what he said in court, though. Brian Tribble would actually be found not guilty of this court case, despite the testimony here, as he stated he did not supply the drugs. Although, according to DEA agent Veronica Baker, after the Len Bias case, Tribble really came up in the drug world. Drug dealers thought he was safe. He was a dealer who wouldn't turn. He had people calling from all over the country to make deals. In a separate case just years later, Tribble would be given 10 years in jail. And although all of this is just horrible, there is a light in the darkness to Len Bias's death. For one thing, Reverend Jesse Jackson, during Len's funeral, would say, "God sometimes uses our best people to get our attention." He described Bias's death as one that could wake up America to its drug problem and scare future generations from drug use, showcasing that while Len's
I don't want to say scared, but discouraged. That's the word you use, discouraged.
good could and would come from it from future generations. Lenny was vulnerable, but all of us are, Jackson would say. It takes years to climb a mountain, one step and we face oblivion. We must make his death the breaking point. For those of us who remain, let us work. Let Lenny rest. Len's own mother, facing this tragedy, took this message more than to heart, especially after her other son, Jay Bias.
Oh yeah, I heard about this.
Shot and killed after a described minor incident just a few short years later. Jay Bias would pass away in the same emergency room as Len. Using these horrible experiences, Lenice Bias has proven just how strong of a woman she is, working anti-drug campaigns tirelessly for almost 40 years. She has said Len is bigger in death than in life because his death has brought life to so many, a message to stay away from drugs. She urged all to practice, agape, unconditional love, since judgment is destructive. Instead, practice unconditional caring, respect, and worth, because no one knows the invisible wounds another carries. Strong words and actions from a mother of two who had her sons ripped from her life. But if there's anything we should take away from this story, it's this: people are not perfect. Many have spoken about how great of a person Len Bias was, with his former coach Lefty Drizel stating Len was a man of great kindness and love, and that God put us on earth to test us, to try us out, to see if we can make his team. I have no doubt that Lenny made his team. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there's anything I want to say, it's that if you are going through anything like this, if you are going through any kind of struggle, you can reach out to me personally if you want, but also reach out to your family members, reach out to the people around you. Your life is very valuable. And also, I think we should all practice the words of Mrs. Bias here. I think we all should love our neighbor as we love ourselves, because we do never know the invisible wounds that another person
is in the Bible too.
So again, thank you for watching. Thank you so much for supporting. You're awesome. And as always, have an awesome day. And cue that music. If you're still
here, hey, RIP to Len Bias and Jay Bias. W video, Mike. Y'all can reach out to me too. Make sure y'all take care of yourselves mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. Like Mike said, your life has value.